Welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of the Center for Occupational Environmental Health, I welcome you to this webinar on the topic of training workers with intellectual disabilities about health and safety on the job, presented by Robin Dewey. Before we get started with today's webinar, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping items first. You'll all be muted during this presentation. So if you'd like to ask a question, please enter it into the Q&A bar on your Zoom interface or into the chat box. And at the completion of the presentation, we'll spend 5 to 10 minutes in Q&A with our presenter. Just to let you know, there is also one continuing education contact hour available for this webinar. And if you want to obtain credit, you would also need to register again at coehce.org and complete an evaluation for the webinar. And then you'd be emailed your certificate of completion. After today, the webinar will be archived and we'll have a link provided at our website and on our COEH YouTube channel. And again, this will continue to be available for continuing education credit. The webinar is also being live streamed on Facebook. Our monthly webinar series takes place on the first Wednesday of each month at 10:30 a.m. Although next month we're taking a holiday, our first webinar of 2018 is called Smoke is Smoke, the Effects of Marijuana Legalization in the Workplace. That's going to be presented by two policy analysts from the California Tobacco Control Program, and that will be on February 7th at 10:30 a.m. So at this time, I'm very pleased to welcome our speaker for today, Robin Dewey, MPH, is Coordinator of Public Programs at UC Berkeley's Labor Occupational Health Program in the School of Public Health. We're very proud of Robin Dewey's work. She has many years of experience, and she was recently honored by Congressman Garamendi with the 2017 Woman of the Year Award, recognized for playing a crucial role in improving the lives of everyone in her community. So I'm very pleased to welcome, and I'll hand over to Robin now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate. Hi, everybody. Just by virtue of, hold on here, we're just a little, yeah. Okay, sorry, little glitch here. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us. Just by way of a little bit more introduction about the Labor Occupational Health Program. We're part of the School of Public Health and the Center for Occupational Environmental Health. LOHP is a community service program of the School of Public Health, so most of what we do is off campus. We've been around for over 40 years. We provide occupational safety and health information and training to workers, employers, unions, health professionals, teachers, etc., others around the state and the country, and also have done some international work as well. And we're particularly well known for our participatory training techniques. On a personal note, although I work on a number of different training projects at LOHP, I have a special interest in the health and safety needs of workers with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is partly because I have an adult son with autism and have learned a lot from him and his friends about work issues that come up. I'm also the president of an all-volunteer nonprofit in Davis, California, where I live, that provides athletic, recreational, and educational activities to children and adults with disabilities. We serve as our local Special Olympics team. So I just mentioned that because I do spend a lot of time with this group of individuals, and as I say, have learned quite a bit from them. So this presentation has two main purposes. The first is that I want to review some of the health and safety issues that workers with intellectual and developmental disabilities may face in the workplace. And then I also want to show you some teaching activities from a curriculum that's available for free for downloading for teaching this population of workers important workplace health and safety skills. I'll just mention that this is a vulnerable working population that rarely receives health and safety training, particularly not training adapted to their learning needs. So let's start by talking about why this is an important topic. Oops. Sorry, we're having a little, there we go. So every year, the following number of workers in the United States suffer a serious work-related injury or illness. And the choices here are 150,000, 1.3 million, or 3 million. So I know this isn't an interactive training, but think about what you think the answer to that is. And a lot of you on the call will probably know that the answer is 3 million. So it's a significant issue, and it's why we care so much about health and safety on the job. More than 12 workers die every day on the job, and in 2015, over 4,800 people. So the next question is, what is the experience of workers with disabilities? And so the question here is, workers with disabilities experience a higher rate of injury than workers without disabilities. So do you think that's true or false? I'll give you a minute to think about it. Well, the answer is that it's true. It is actually really hard to assess this very well, the work-related injury rate for workers with disabilities. But a couple of studies have shown us that the rate is significantly higher. So when you look at BLS data, we see that in general, the rate of injury is 3.2 injured workers for every 100 FTE workers. But when you look at community rehabilitation programs, and these are facilities such as Easter Seals, the ARC, Goodwill, etc., that we find that the rate is much higher. It's between 4.9 to 5.7. 5.7 is the rate for the smaller workplaces with fewer than 250 employees. Community rehab programs are sheltered employment environments, and they have been the largest type of employer of people with disabilities for decades. And we all know that the injury data is underreported significantly. So this is a what we do know. The other thing is that there was a study that was done that was funded by NIOSH, that was conducted by the Ohio State University, a department there, and they were using National Health Interview Survey data, and they concluded that the injury rate is almost 3 times as high for workers with disabilities. So why is this rate high? And I think that there's a couple of reasons. The first and the most important reason is that just like other vulnerable working populations, including immigrant workers and temp workers and young workers and new workers in general, these folks are at increased risk of injury because they're working in workplaces where there are significant hazards. And so these are common work activities that you see listed here: light manufacturing, assembly, recycling, janitorial, industrial laundries, etc., warehouse work. These, for the most part, have higher rates of injury than other workplaces. So I think that's the number one reason. But I think we also have to acknowledge that workers with disabilities may bring special risk factors to the job that may add to their risk of injury. So things like distractibility or medical or physical conditions, poor problem-solving skills, poor difficulty communicating, difficulty reading, processing language may be more difficult. And then finally, difficulty generalizing to new situations. So my son works in a grocery store as a courtesy clerk, and he's worked there for several years, and all of these risk factors almost are true for him, and they presented challenges. So the kinds of challenges that may result from these risk factors that relate to health and safety are trouble understanding the health risks, inability to effectively communicate, difficulty anticipating consequences of actions, challenges complying with procedures, difficulty reading and understanding signs, etc., knowing what to do in the case of an emergency. So I mention this not at all to suggest that workers with disabilities should not be employed or not be included in jobs, but just to make sure that they are placed in safe jobs, and that we're looking for employers that recognize the importance of health and safety and do what they can to reduce hazards for all workers, including workers with disabilities, but that they also offer accommodations that may be needed so that workers are protected, and also that they provide all workers with appropriate health and safety training in a manner that they can understand. So, as you know, one essential element of a good health and safety program is health and safety training. Health and safety training is limited for all workers, unfortunately. People don't get it nearly like they should, but it is typically even more limited for workers with disabilities. So to help address this gap, we developed a basic curriculum for teaching workers with intellectual disabilities basic health and safety skills. And I'm going to introduce you to the activities in our curriculum. The curriculum is called Staying Safe at Work. But first, a little background. It was specifically developed for community rehabilitation programs or other supported employment agencies and high school transition programs to provide the basic occupational safety and health skills to workers, teens and adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities. We initially drafted the curriculum in 2006. We pilot tested it several times, including with employees at Walgreens distribution centers that were in their training center, learning jobs in order to enter Walgreens. I don't know whether you know that Walgreens has made a commitment to hire people from the who have disabilities into their distribution centers. These are warehouses. And then we finalized it in 2009 and then started conducting numerous training of trainers to teach people to use the curriculum. So most recently, however, it was updated and adopted by NIOSH. And so that was about a year ago. And the curriculum and the PowerPoint slides are available for downloading from their website. So I want to take you through the curriculum now, but it basically teaches the basic occupational safety and health skills. These are skills that everybody needs to know as they enter the workforce. So this does not take the place of job-specific health and safety training, but it provides what we think of as transferable basic occupational safety and health skills. So the idea that you need to be able to identify the things that can hurt you or make you sick in any workplace that you may be entering. You need to know that hazards can be controlled, that just because there's a hazard doesn't mean there's not something that can be done to prevent injuries. You need to know what to do in the case of an emergency or something unexpected happens. You need to know that you have rights and responsibilities on the job. And then finally, and this is we've found to be some of the more challenging skills for our vulnerable workers. You need the skill to speak up effectively when a problem occurs. So let's go through the curriculum. It starts with a little introductory 3-minute videotape that introduces a lot of the topics that are in the curriculum. And the video features the story of a girl, Mallory, who got hurt at work. And it serves as an introduction and also sort of drives home the point of why we care about this issue, that when people get hurt at work, they can have lasting results. Then one of the main skills that all workers need to have to stay safe at work is to be able to identify the job hazards that can cause work-related injuries and illnesses. So we start with a little overview, and then we have people practice seeing hazards in various kinds of workplaces, starting with a restaurant, so that they may not be working in a restaurant, but they practice identifying the things that they see in the picture that could hurt somebody or make them sick. And so this activity is done, and I'll show you the other illustrations in a second, but this activity is done either as a group, in a group setting where you see the PowerPoint and people call out the different hazards, or there are handouts that can be used instead where people can do it. So can do it at a table. So the idea is for the curriculum to be very flexible, because there are a variety of settings, and we wanted to make it available to it's being used in different things. So you can see various things we do. Make sure that we're talking about ergonomics, as you can see some of the issues here, as well as more safety issues and chemical issues, etc. So this is a restaurant, and then we have a grocery store, and again, people call out what hazards they see. Then there's janitorial, and this is a chance to have people identify and talk about sort of the results or things that can happen as a result of these hazards. Then there's grounds work. Then there's an industrial laundry. And then finally a warehouse. And this warehouse, as you can see, there are a number of different hazards, and we use this illustration to start to talk about some specific hazards in a little bit more detail. So these specific hazards include a little bit about chemicals and how they get inside the body, how you find out about them, what kinds of harm they can do. We talk a little bit about noise and how that can affect people over time. We have an activity that relates to ergonomic hazards and identifying the risk factors, so the positions that people their bodies are in as they're working. A little bit about lifting properly, etc. And then finally, stress, and just to recognize that people may not understand that stress is also a hazard, and so it's a chance to get people thinking about that as well. Then we introduce the concept of controlling hazards and preventing injuries and illnesses. And we use this diagram of a pyramid in many of our trainings to drive home the concept that you're shooting for the top. You're looking for ways of removing the hazard so that people don't have to follow policies and procedures. The hazard is gone. We spend a lot more time when we're talking to employers and lead workers and supervisors about this concept, but we do want to introduce it to all of our working populations that we train. So after introducing this concept of hazards being able to be controlled, we go through some stories. And we have 4 different stories where the way this works is that we show the picture, and again, these are also available as handouts. Ask what's happening in the picture, what the hazard is, and what could happen to this worker, John, as a way of reminding people that hazards lead to injury or illness, and that can have an impact on your life. So it's to get at that concept. So the question is, what's the hazard? What could happen to them? And then what are some ways you think that you could prevent John from being injured? What are ways of solving, in this case, the problem of a slippery floor? So we have people call them out and remind people that, you know, certain things are more protective. Preventing these from spilling in the first place is an example of that. Our other stories are, this is Bill. And so again, what's the hazard you see? What could happen to Bill? And what are ways to prevent Bill from being injured? And this gives us a chance to talk about safe lifting, and also should the idea of back braces come up, to remind people that those don't work. They're not personal protective equipment that works for preventing back injuries. Then we have Anne's story. So again, this is another chance to talk about chemicals and how they get inside the body and what can happen if somebody is exposed to chemicals, both immediately but also chronically. And then what potential solutions would prevent Anne from getting sick or hurt from chemicals. And then finally, this is Mary's story, and this actually came from, this is a Walgreens picture where she's picking products. And again, this is obviously an ergonomic issue. And so we talk about, you know, what could happen and what are some ideas about solutions. Just as an aside, what Walgreens did when they realized that they had this situation is they put up a platform to bring her closer to the work. So then the next activity, so keeping in mind our different basic occupational safety and health skills. Remember that we said that people need to know what to do in the case of an emergency. So we have an activity on this after explaining what we're talking about when we talk about emergencies and the importance of knowing what to do if something should happen, and practicing those, you know, what to do, how to get out, when to get out, where to go, etc. So this activity is a board game, and what happens during the board game is people learn about different kinds of emergencies and what to do, and they may not know the answers to the questions as they're playing, but they learn in the course of playing the game. We typically team 2 people up to play against another 2 people. This is the only activity in the curriculum that does require reading skills. We really tried to avoid that, but the solution to that is that we advise, if we have non-readers, that job coaches can help with the reading part. So you see that there are a number of different cards, and as the team rolls dice and goes around the board, if they land on a question mark, the other team asks them the question, or the job coach. And if they mostly get it right, the answer right, then they blast ahead 1 spot, and then get a chance to answer another roll the dice and answer another question. And if they get that one right, they blast ahead 1 spot, but it goes to the other team to play. So they go back and forth until somebody gets around to the home, safe at home. The next activity has to do with understanding your rights and responsibilities, and we do this through a labor law bingo game. There are 13 different boards, and this is a short activity. There are only 13 questions. Here are a couple of sample questions. You know, what is the name of the U.S. government agency that handles complaints about workplace safety? Obviously, the answer is OSHA. And I'll just mention that because this is a national curriculum, all of the answers can't be state specific. So that's why OSHA as opposed to in California, Cal OSHA. But there is a second labor law bingo game that's available for high school transition programs or high school programs that work with students with disabilities. That is also on the NIOSH website, an earlier curriculum that we developed for youth at work. It's called Youth at Work Talking Safety. And because child labor laws really vary by state, there are 50 state-specific versions of this game. And so if you just Google NIOSH Talking Safety, you'll come up with their website and click on your state, and the bingo game, as well as all the resources, are state specific. So that's what we direct people to do who may be accessing the Staying Safe at Work curriculum, that if they're teaching teens, not to use the bingo game that's part of the Staying Safe at Work curriculum, because that's written for adults. We suggest that they go to the state-specific one on the NIOSH website. And then finally, the last activity has to do with speaking up when there's a problem. And there are two activities that get at this. The first is this little story about Jill's difficult day at work, and you can see she's spilling chemical products, and her boss asks her what happened, and she explains, and then he tells her to go get rags from the bathroom and clean it up, and she says, "I was told not to handle chemicals because I haven't been trained and I don't have gloves." And the boss says, "There's no time for that. If you want to keep working here, need to pitch in." And then the questions are, what did Jill do right? Well, obviously she spoke up in this case. And then what advice would you give Jill about what to do next? And so there's a little, brainstorming about who could she talk to get some help. What could she say to her boss that would protect herself, but also show that she's an employee that wants to keep working. And so she suggests, well, is there something else I could do? And somebody who's trained could come clean this up. Things like that. The second activity that's part of this lesson has to do with little tiny role plays that give trainees the chance to practice speaking up about different issues. The idea being that if you practice this skill of speaking up in a educational setting, that you're more likely to know what to say if that situation does come up for you in the future. And so we find that helps. So the way this works is that there are a series of different tiny role plays, and the instructor in the class, whoever's teaching this class, reads us one of the stories to a class participant, and then they talk about what they would say. So here's an example. One of the stories: you are a new employee at a large grocery store. Your job is to bag groceries. Your boss asks you to help in the deli cleaning the meat slicing machine. You've never done this job before and you don't know what to do. And then their series of questions are, what is the problem? So that we get people to think about, is there a problem and what is it? And define it. What should you do? Well, I should say something to somebody. Who should you talk to, and what would you say? And so it gives people a chance to sort of think that through and get some help from the job coach or whoever's teaching the class, and to practice actually saying those words out loud. So here's one more story. You work in an office. Your boss tells you to copy several things, then run an errand, then gather a bunch of supplies. She talks quickly and doesn't make her instructions clear. So what's the problem? What should you do? Whom should you talk to? And what would you say? And we also suggest in the curriculum that trainers come up with their own stories that relate to their clients' workplaces and experience. So, because there may be other issues too. Okay, so what has been our experience teaching Staying Safe at Work? As I've mentioned, I've taught a number of training of trainers programs, and including fairly recently, actually, and as well as conducting various presentations and short workshops. I've also been working with the state of New Hampshire, their Institute on Disability, to promote use of the curriculum statewide. So the idea being it's a small state, and through some training of trainer programs that we've conducted, we're hoping to institutionalize the use there, and we're also looking for funding to do a more formal evaluation of the curriculum. So the feedback that we're getting is that these programs, the supported employment programs, we're targeting mostly, are finding that they really appreciate having a curriculum that's ready to go, that they don't have to come up with, that's specifically designed with the learning needs of their population in mind. The other thing that they've expressed is that they recognize that teaching about health and safety, this is just a practical issue, fits well into their billable hours, but that they also recognize that having a basic health and safety certificate of completion for their participants increases their employability. And we've found that with other working populations as well, with young workers, et cetera, that when we interview employers, they do tend to appreciate that people come with basic skills in health and safety, and that looks good on a resume. So I just want to say now, before closing, that there is a big movement in the disability world in place right now, where the sheltered work environments are closing down in favor of competitive mainstream employment, and for workers with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And so it's a big movement. It does make training using this curriculum a little bit more challenging, although what we've found is in conversations with supported employment agencies is that since they don't necessarily have all of their participants gathered together in one place, we've discovered that they can teach the curriculum, they can teach these skills using the activities in one-on-one situations or one-on-two situations, etc. So, for example, the job coach playing the games with their individuals, et cetera. So we think the curriculum is flexible enough to be used as we transition to this new employment situation for workers with disabilities. So that's all I had. I'd be happy to answer questions if anybody has any. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation, Robin. Just a reminder to those listening that you can enter questions into the Q&A, and then we can take some time to ask Robin today. While we're waiting for folks to come up with some questions, I just wondered, Robin, if you could just explain a bit more about what is a sheltered work environment, and I'm afraid I'm not familiar, and so just interested to know more details.
Okay. So sheltered workshops are environments where there's support staff there, but most of the people that they're working with have a disability, and typically an intellectual or developmental disability. It's sometimes also physical disabilities as well. And so examples are Pride Industries here in, it's actually nationally, Goodwill Industries, Easter Seals, etc. Some of those organizations are now doing work out in the community as well. But historically, all the work was done within the work environment there, the workshop. So let's see. What would be another example? UCP, United Cerebral Palsy, has sheltered work environments, but as I say, they've been closing down over just the last year or two, and they aren't, in my personal opinion, by definition, bad in work environments. They There have certainly been some work environments like that that have not been very good, and I think people are concerned about those workers being paid sub-minimum wage because they're typically paid in those environments based on their productivity, as opposed to minimum wage. So that's changing as well. My only concern about the closing down of sheltered work environments is the unemployment rate,
Mm.
and that I personally believe that almost anybody can do work. I'm not sure everybody can be employed in a competitive mainstream work environment. So that's the challenge, is how we move people into mainstream environments who may have some significant challenges. So again, the goal is to get everybody employed. A lot of our life is, we find meaningful work or work, meaning in our lives through work. And so I want to make, my personal interest is in making sure that everybody has that opportunity. But we also want them to be safe and supported. So
Do
I don't know
you?
if that helps, but
Yes, that was very interesting. And so then the employer example you gave of Walgreens, is that,
Mhm.
are they employing kind of in a more mainstream work environment, or does that fall under the sheltered work environment?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. No, it's more mainstream in that it's not exclusively people with disabilities. I believe their initial mission, and I don't know whether they've kept this up completely, but their initial mission was within their warehouses or their distribution centers to hire about a third of the workforce, which is a huge
Mm.
percentage from the population of workers with uh, intellectual disabilities. And I think that they are still trying to do that. So yes, so that would um, be somewhere probably in the middle. Um, uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we have a question from the audience member saying it's a fantastic presentation and thanks for delivering this message and championing this initiative. He says, as a parent with a child on the autistic spectrum, he does appreciate this.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, this resonates with effective training approaches across the board. If we can train health and safety topics as well with intellectual and disabled communities, then we can train all populations, from the well-educated to the most vulnerable workers. I guess that's more of a comment, but
Yeah,
I
I
wanted.
agree. I agree with him. Thank you for saying that. Yes, there's no excuse. Everybody needs this kind of health and safety training to stay safe.
I wondered if you had any more information sort of about the impact nationally of this, your training being available. Like, did NIOSH track the numbers of people using? And
Yeah, I'm sure they track the numbers of downloads, but I don't know what that is. Things have varied over the years, and you know how things go. Things are up and down. I know that in California, the program that uh, that serves high school students with disabilities in terms of providing them with work experience is a program called Workability. And that's all over the state in most of the high schools around the state. And at various points over the last few years, they've really made a commitment to use the curriculum to teach their students. And so, periodically we go back and remind them to to keep doing that. But that was a major commitment that a single program in a single state has made. I also was the health and safety trainer, I guess, and I'm going to be doing this again this year for an organization called Source America, which used to be called NIOSH, which is the National. I'm forgetting what NIOSH stands for now, but at any rate, Source America is its name for the last few years, and what they are is a federal nonprofit. It's kind of a weird sort of thing that supports community rehab programs in getting federal contracts as well as some commercial contracts as well. And so I've done a lot of training for them, and presumably their members, which are, a lot of the CRPs around the country, have used the curriculum. But this has been a challenge for me to figure out who is actually using it. It's been hard to find out, except for anecdotally.
Yes. We have a couple more questions. At the workplace I went to with employees who had intellectual disabilities, all of them had oversight with an on-site supervisor with lots of oversight. However, this was over 10 years ago. Has the workplace changed?
That's a good question. I would say, I really don't know how it works in other states. In California, we have a very we are really lucky in terms of what the state has prioritized for support of people with disabilities. We had an act passed called the Lanterman Act several years ago, and as a result, there are whole regional center systems in the state that provide supported employment. So, as well as living support too. So what often happens is, and this is the way it's supposed to happen, is that there will be a meeting where the particular needs of a worker are assessed in terms of how much support that person needs, whether they need one-on-one or whether they need somebody to occasionally check on them. So, it really varies according to the need. Another model that exists is they're called enclaves. So that would be a group of people working in a regular workplace, but it's a group together, and sometimes they're janitorial crews, et cetera, and they would typically always have a job coach or somebody with them. So in the case of my son, he does not. He has a job coach who checks in every day during his shift, but he doesn't have somebody there all the time. And so what's happened for him is the job coach has worked closely with the staff at the grocery store to provide what they call natural support. And they, communicate regularly, the job coach and my son and the staff there about, how are things going, what are they doing. One time I know he tried to get on a vehicle and drive it, so he got kind of reprimanded for that. So things, sometimes unexpected things happen, and it helps you remember to say out loud, if you think you might want to do this, don't. Check with somebody first. So anyway.
Thank you. And then we have another question saying, I appreciate your presentation very much. I have done ergonomics consultation work with many of the organizations you mentioned and found the employers to be amazing examples to my employers with non-disabled employees. I appreciate the training examples and would like to incorporate in my future training. Is this available?
Absolutely. You'll see on the screen right now the link to NIOSH, the CDC's NIOSH, if you you can jot down that link and then just click on it, and you'll see both the curriculum and the PowerPoint slides that go with it. Or maybe the easiest thing is just to Google NIOSH staying safe at work, and it'll come up. But yes, it's free to use, and we just want to get it out. We, appreciate crediting if you don't mind, but it's a public document, so.
Just to say to everyone, we still have a few more minutes. If you'd like to ask a question, please, you can enter it into the Q&A or the chat. And in the meantime, if anyone has a question, I just wondered, Robin, kind of what would you say was the biggest challenge you had when developing the materials? Because it's so impressive to think of not only the great visuals, but also developing 2 different games, which I know game development is a whole arena of skill. So I just wondered if you wanted to sort of say something to that.
Well, I would say one of the challenges is a challenge that trainers / health educators face with any population is making sure that the words that they use actually, that anybody would understand those words. I remember with the labor law bingo game, there were times, when you would ask, there would be a question that we would have to change, just because especially after pilot testing, it would realize that, that may make sense to us, but it won't necessarily make sense to somebody who isn't in this field at all. So there was that. The other challenge that is more recent is trying to evaluate the curriculum appropriately. So, we think people are learning from this, but how much did they already know when they came in versus what did they learn from the class? And so that's been a bit of a challenge to develop a way of assessing whether people learn these skills and didn't already know them. I think I can safely say that they may not have thought of them before, but when you ask the question, what are some examples of health and safety hazards you might face, when you ask that question, that gets people to think about it, and so they can come up with those hazards. So then if you were to ask in a post-test, what hazards might you come up with, you might come up with the same hazards. And so therefore, I don't know if this is making any sense, but just, are you able to really assess whether people are learning from the class? I mean, I do think we are seeing that it's raising awareness about this as an issue among the population, and certainly among their support agencies. But if anybody ends up having ideas for us about good evaluation, especially when we have a population that doesn't necessarily read or understand abstract thinking, that really requires things to be really concrete, is often the case. Anyway, so I would just say that's our big challenge at the moment. And we really do think that the training works, but how do we prove that?
Yes, I think that's always a challenge, regardless, but it seems like, especially as you say, with a population who might not be able to read, it would be particularly difficult.
Yeah.
And yet so important, because you've got to justify and promote the program, which kind of leads me to another question in terms of, what do you see that could be helpful for advocacy for such a program, say in terms of, encouraging more employers to be like Walgreens, or even just for sort of people like our audience working in health and safety, just sort of what should be top of mind for them in regards to this?
Right. Well, I would just say that one of the things that I have really come to appreciate is that this is a population that has a lot of gifts and has a lot of skills. And so the emphasis is less on disability as opposed to disability. So the focus is on ability, because it's just a matter of finding those skills and matching them to the needs of a workplace. And so what I would, if I were talking to employers, I would say be open to creating jobs that play, that meet your needs, but also play to the skills of a population of workers that may appreciate doing the same thing kind of over and over again, meaning the same sort of task, or and I'm not speaking ergonomically here at the moment, but or some of the tasks that would, if were done by somebody with intellectual challenges, that would free up other staff to do other things, be open to that. So anyway, that's, and I would just say that because I spend a lot of time with folks in my non-work time as well, that it's definitely made my life richer and appreciate differences in people. So and I think the last thing I would just say is that there's this is why we need diversity. And that means kind of living and working with people with differences is just essential to really appreciating that even though somebody may have a difference, we all have differences. That those are good things, and they bring a lot to the table.
Yes, thank you. We have another comment from an attendee saying, thank you so much for sharing this program. Those of us, the college internship program, will definitely be looking into how to incorporate this into our curriculum with transition-aged adults.
Great.
And would be interested in working with you to look into how can we justify the effectiveness. And the attendee shared their email, which we can give to you,
Great.
Robin. So,
Great. Thank you.
well, unless anyone has any more questions, I'd like to say thank you so much for this today. It was very informative, and what wonderful work you're doing. It's really great, and we appreciate your giving us this time. And also, this webinar will still be available. So if you anyone wants to share with others who they may think be interested, please do let us know. And I just wanted to say, oh, we have a couple more questions. So as we have a couple more minutes, let's ask. We have another person say, thanks for the presentation. This is my first awareness of a safety program for intellectual disability. I'm changing the way I say it. Keep up the good work. Just one suggestion, since I'm attending live in Kuala Lumpur, is it possible to start future presentations earlier in the morning? Well, unfortunately, we also want to try to make these available to those in Hawaii, so it's difficult to get a perfect time for the whole globe. But the good news is they are streaming on Facebook Live, and they stay on Facebook. So if you follow us, COEH, at Facebook, you'll be able to watch the videos at any time. And also we hope to upload them onto our YouTube channel. So we'll have information about that on our website. And then we have another comment to say, thank you so much, such great work and fabulous program.
Thank you.
And we will email out a link of this webinar today to all those who participated, as well as a PDF of the webinar. So At that, I'd like to say thank you very much again. And just to remind everybody that next month we're taking a holiday, but we will have our February 7th webinar, which will be the first webinar of 2018, and that's going to be called Smoke is Smoke, the Effects of Marijuana Legalization in the Workplace. And that'll be presented by two policy analysts from the California Tobacco Control Program. So that's going to be Wednesday, February 7th at 10:30 a.m. We will continue in 2018 with monthly webinars on different topics, and if anyone has any suggestions for a topic, we welcome them. Next year, we are actually going to be celebrating 4 decades of the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health. So May 4th and 5th, we're going to have a 2-day symposium to celebrate our 40th birthday. So please look out for information on that. So on that note, I hope everyone has a very happy holiday, and thank you for joining us. And thank you again to our presenter, Robin Dewey, today.
Thank you for inviting me, Julia.
Bye-bye.
Bye.